The Chinese have popularized the belief that every crisis presents an inherent opportunity. In this edition of Business Africa, we find out how workers, businesses, and economies are navigating several crises, both local and global. Welcome, I'm your host, Afolake Oinloye. Let's take a look at the major stories this week. Global labor boards champion social protection for all workers as the world struggles to recover from the effects of the pandemic, war, and inflation. As demand for minerals like cobalt increases, we explore ways in which the mineral-rich African continent can optimize production and elevate its people out of poverty. Entry of the Russian ride-hailing app has excited customers and worried existing players. We share insight into the mobility sector of this Southern African nation. Workers all over the world are worried about the repercussions that the ongoing inflation trend may have on their employers and consequently their jobs. Coming right after the disruptive coronavirus pandemic, the possibility of company closures, mass layoffs, and abuse of workers' rights looms large. We spoke to the new head of the International Labour Organization to find out what can be done to protect workers. But first, let's take a look at this short video.
They say that when two elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. Similarly, with the world still grappling with two crises, the pandemic and growing inflation, it is ultimately workers bearing the brunt of economic disruptions. All over the world, prices of fuel, food and other commodities are rising. As economies and businesses find ways of recovering from disruptions to global supply chains caused by the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, there is a possibility that extreme measures like retrenchment of workers may be taken. The International Labour Organization is mandated to protect the rights of workers, including promoting employment and promoting good working conditions. For ILO's new boss, Gilbert Houngbo, social protection is the ultimate solution that can mitigate effects of crises that are often inevitable.
Gilbert Houngbo, Director General of the International Labour Organization, joins us for more on that story. It's a pleasure to have you on the program. Now, the ongoing conflict and inflation around the globe have made workers even more vulnerable to job loss through termination and retention. What is your organization doing to significantly push for more safety nets, including more social protection coverage for workers?
Of course, there are a lot that is going on since the COVID, and let alone the current crisis in Ukraine that puts the workers in a more fragile situation. Countries, essentially from the global north, countries that have much more fiscal space can come up with some temporary measure to help their workers, their small businesses, whereas countries that have tighter fiscal space or are in a debt stress have very little. And that's one of the lessons that we drew from the impact from COVID-19. And therefore, the point that I'm going to press hard on this is the importance of a universal social protection, that every household, no matter where you are, every household can have access to a minimum packages of social protection.
Child labor is still a pertinent issue in many countries, especially those with high poverty levels. Now, how can the 160 million children affected be helped?
The issue is very complex, but we have to be very, very clear. You know, our children has to be at school or at play, and not in a child labor. That being said, there are some consideration, as you said, particularly in poor countries, but beyond the poverty issue is also sometimes the cultural issue. But clearly, the poverty dimension is important. The more we have a social protection scheme, the more the children and the family have access to free education, to school meal program, the better they will send the children to school rather than sending them to work in the farm. So that we need to step up the socioeconomic programs, particularly in the rural area. It is also important to keep in mind that 70-75% of child labor happen in the agriculture sector. So it's important to really zero in the agriculture sector, where the rural area, the situation can be very complicated. That being said, we also need to recognize that there have been a lot of progress. And I've seen a lot of countries in Africa, in Asia, that are much more gung-ho to address the issue while protecting the cultural dimension to it.
Now, organizations, especially SMEs, have been equally hit by the pandemic-induced supply chain disruption and risk closure. Now, how can this organization, especially a source of livelihood to many, be supported to survive this developing economic crisis?
I think we need to recognize that the supply chain globally have been a source of job creation, a source of economic growth, particularly for poor country or emerging economy. So the supply chain have the potential to a positive contribution to the global economy. But it's important for us to ensure that in that trajectory, we make sure that the workers' rights are respected. We make sure that there's a minimum protection, protection in terms of social protection, but also in terms of what we call OSH, the occupational safety and health at workplace. And we also have to make sure that the protection of the environment dimension is also secure. So the consideration of the three dimensions, economic, social, and environmental, has to ensure. The last point that I will make when it comes to the social and the global supply chain is that right now the challenge is most of the multinational, of course, they operate in more than one country. So that cross-border dimension complicates sometimes the issue, and we need to look at how we handle that cross-border dimension of the issue.
Mr. Gilbert Houngbo, thanks so much for making up time for this interview.
Thank you so much for having me.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of mineral wealth. And yet, like many other African countries, the majority of the people of the DRC live in abject poverty, a stark contrast to their country's wealth. As demand for DRC's minerals like cobalt increases, we explore possible solutions that need to be implemented by African government to ensure that proceeds from mineral exploitation trickle down to every citizen.
Africa has about 30% of the world's total mineral resources, according to several financial reports. These include oil and gas, bauxite, cobalt, platinum, diamonds, phosphates, among several others. DRC alone supplies half of the cobalt that the world needs to power electric cars, iPhone batteries, and other essential tech products. Yet, 73% of DRC population still grapples with poverty, and the contrast is true for many other mineral-rich African countries, according to the World Bank. At the end of 2021, after acknowledging a disorder in the mining sector, the Congolese government took steps to regulate the operations of foreign mining companies as well as artisanal mining, which employs many locals. Considering the new mineral discoveries that may yet be made, it is likely that the current low rates of exploration and production in Africa is also holding back the continent. While in 2019, Africa's mineral production was about 1 billion tons with a monetary value of about $406 billion. The World Mining Congress has proposed that if government work well with the private sector and citizenry, the continent's GDP can be massively improved beyond the current estimate of $2.6 trillion.
In Zambia, the entry of a new player in the ride-hailing business has caused some disruption. While the customers are loving the Russian Houngbo app for its affordability, the homegrown Ulendo, which has been a monopoly in the industry for the last 4 years, is worried. We explore the possibilities that competition brings to the mobility in the Southern African nation.
Houngbo is increasingly becoming popular in Zambia's capital, Lusaka. The Russian ride-hailing service has simply taken Zambians by storm after its launch in April this year.
If it wasn't for Houngbo, like if I use just maybe a local tax, maybe I was going to pay more than that. So as for me, I support Houngbo.
Houngbo is a sub-brand of Yandex Taxi, a ride-sharing service that operates in over 600 cities across 17 countries in Europe, Central Asia, Middle East and Africa. Zambia becomes the 5th African country where the company is operating after Ivory Coast, Ghana, Cameroon and Senegal. So far, the online international ride-hailing service has partnered with over 1,000 vehicles and 11 transport companies in the Southern African country.
It's a good app because the concept is very good. It's helpful. It gets the job done. My view is that work is honorable, and as long as I'm able to work.
Houngbo, or Yandex Go in Fu, becomes the first renowned international online ride-hailing service in Zambia. Local brands such as Orlando Taxi are now facing the toughest competition in Houngbo, which works with almost 700,000 drivers across the world.
That story from Zambia brings us to the end of this week's edition of Business Africa. We hope you also seize every opportunity amid whatever crisis you're facing. For more business stories and news, stay tuned to Africanews.com. You can also follow us on social media at Africanews across all platforms. Thanks for watching and bye for now.